Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. Welcome to the IWSC webinar on liqueurs and bitters. My name is Mila Gorchakova. I'm part of the IWSC marketing team. And as our speaker today, we have David T. Smith. Hello again,
Hello.
David. We're jumping from one webinar to another this morning. Just had our session on vodka a couple of minutes ago. So David is a member of our Spirits Judging Committee. He is our head judge for liqueurs and bitters, as well as an independent spirits consultant, writer, and author of multiple books on spirits. So really a great person to talk about the recent trends in liqueurs and bitters, as well as to explain a little bit further about how we judge this incredibly diverse category, because we do get a lot of questions from companies, from brands, about how we categorize, how we judge, etc., etc. It really is an exciting, diverse category. We've been seeing an incredible growth in entries year on year recently. So it's a great moment to talk about it, really. So David, over to you.
Thank you very much. Well, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us. Yes, liqueurs and specialty and all the other very interesting things that don't quite fit everywhere else. It's quite it's an exciting thing to judge because you never quite know what you what's going to sort of come across your table, as it were. It was the day where sort of liqueurs really were limited to a load of curacao. I think I remember one year I ended up judging many years ago, but it was sort of 16 odd curacao. So some were clear and some were orange and some were blue, and that was basically what we had. And they're all very, very similar. And we've had lots of cassis and things like that. And we still get some of those, and it's still great to have those. But now we are really, things have really, stepped up a gear with getting things like Mastika from Greece. I mean, that is a liqueur that's done very well over recent years, and lots of just different flavor profiles that we wouldn't necessarily try. It's particularly like here in Europe or in the UK. Liqueurs have really become a way of getting a sense of place from lots of different places around the world, and that being sort of infused literally sometimes in the liqueur, and you can kind of get a taste of that when you're not in the original location where it was made. I think it's fantastic, and some things are very much, they're in the sweetness. Things like like your creme de cassis, the high sugar content that's needed in that. Whereas other things are more towards flavored spirits, but they do have some sweetness in them, but they might not technically be the full sugar content that might be typically seen for European liqueurs. And I think that's one of the fun things about it is, there is some discernment and some judgment that was made, as I said, in the vodka seminar that we had. The most important thing to me is to make sure that everything is judged as fairly as possible. What I like to describe as everything gets a fair shake, and just because someone's not tried it before, a judge might not have tried this flavor, they might not be familiar with Pandam or something like that, doesn't mean that that should be reflected in the score. And so we always look and look at what these flavors should be, and hopefully there's someone on the table that is familiar with it, or often I am, and we can have a talk about the sort of thing that you might expect and kind of go from there. But yeah, there's more discussion. I think when we have our judges, we're looking for people that just appreciate flavor in general. They appreciate complexity, and balance and mouthfeel, whatever the flavor might be, because you don't always know exactly what it is, and also encourage an element of open-mindedness. I think is really important. And I think Dave, who's on the call as well, our head of operations, we'll have a discussion beforehand, particularly if there's anything that I think, oh, actually, we might need some more information on that, or I'd like to try that, and maybe give the briefing note before the judges actually come to try it, which tends to be a better way of doing things. Then we look out for those sorts of things. So there's definitely some good teamwork, which is much appreciated by me, again, to help me, and as it should be by yourselves, because it's helping everything get to be judged as fairly as possible. tend to group. I mean, this is a big topic that we're talking about here, but when we're talking about generally like the liqueurs, they tend to be grouped with like flavors together. So, you know, we might have lemons together, we might have orange together and things like that. But we also possibly won't necessarily have everything in one go, because if you have had to try about 24 limoncellos in one go, by the time you get to the end of it, you're the sweetness and the acidity and the oiliness, it just totally coats the tongue, and then you're not so easy to be so discernible. So actually having a bit of a split for things like that, I think it makes quite a lot of sense. So very mindful of potential palate fatigue in the judges. And that includes when we do things like the bitters as well, and we talk about the different kinds of bitters that there can be, because you've got things like Campari, which is your potable bitter, i.e. you're designed, you could drink it on its own just on the rocks if you wanted to, versus your non-potable bitters, which would be something like Angostura bitters, anything that's in like a little shake bottle or little eyedropper, where really you don't drink that on its own. It's there just to kind of enhance the flavor of a cocktail. And so we split those out, and we make sure that the judges understand the differences with things like that. You know, certain things like absinthe, we make sure that judges have, and the same with pastis as well. Anything that needs to be loosed, you know, we add the water and be cloudy, we make sure that they have the facilities that they can do that, so that it can be prepared in the way that is kind of the traditional way of doing it, and you get a much better understanding of the complexities of the flavors. And again, when we talk about things like aquavit, which has been, I mean, aquavit has been a huge boom recently. We make sure people understand the different types between the Norwegian styles and the caraway forward styles and the dill forward styles. To make sure, yes, the dill forward styles are less common, but they can be just as fantastic as the caraway ones. So they need to all be treated very fairly. We are conscious about the order in which things are tasted, because certainly things like pastis, once you've had that, with all that anise, there's not a lot that you can taste afterwards. So we're very conscious of things like that, and you know, things like cream liqueurs and the potential impact that they can have as well. But cream liqueurs always a highlight of mine. I always enjoy doing the cream liqueurs. There's some really exciting things and exciting flavors coming out from all over the world actually, which is fantastic.
So I'm going to ask Dave, our head of operations, to answer the first question, as it's quite technical and specific to how we categorize.
Yeah, so as David's mentioned earlier, obviously liqueurs can have a different definition depending on where you are in the world. Generally, we go with the European definition. However, we are also aware that obviously in certain other countries, there are different regulations regarding sort of sugar level and such. So, for instance, within Europe, liqueurs generally have to be the minimum 15% ABV. However, we do often get from Asian countries some umeshu liqueurs, which tend to be slightly lower in ABV. With regards to this particular spirit, that mentions no added sugar, but a sweetness of 13.2 Brix. If my maths is right, that corresponds to 132 grams per litre of sugar. And given the ABV of the spirit is 15% or above, this sounds like it would fit quite nicely in our liqueur category. We have a number of other categories. So every bottle that comes to us and is entered into the competition is checked by our warehouse team with WSET trained staff. And if there's anything a little bit unusual where we're not sure, it might straddle two categories, we'll look into it a bit more, potentially research with the producer as to which category it would sit best within. And then on the day, if there's still any sort of debate on it, it's often something that we'd speak to our judges and our judging committee, such as David, about, and find really where we think this will sit best. And we're very open with our judges and what we try and encourage. We're aware that with the huge growth in spirits categories and more people doing more innovative things, that there are more and more bottles out there that won't necessarily fit in just one category and may straddle multiple categories. And we often get asked by producers, Does this mean I'll get marked down if I'm in the wrong category? Will this be a problem? And absolutely not. We encourage our judges to evaluate the liquid in the glass rather than the category that's entered. And our judges generally accept that there may be things that don't entirely fit into one category, or perhaps it would be better in another category. And we always encourage to evaluate on this. So you'll never be marked down for entering in a so-called incorrect category.
Amazing.
Dave, the
Thank you
point
so
I
much.
made earlier was that we encourage our judges to be there to evaluate the spirits rather than worry about the categorization. They're not there to categorize, they're there to evaluate.
Exactly. Like, we very much view the categories entered as more of a, if anything, it's more of a help for our behind the scenes operations team to put the things in a corresponding tasting order that makes sense for the judges, rather than saying this is this category, this is that. It's more so, as David said earlier, your things like pastis, or for example a chili liqueur that's particularly strong, you wouldn't want to be tasting that first in the day, so we make sure those things are at the end. So really, I'd encourage producers to look at the categories as more a guideline for us for how to help us put the tasting order together for the judges, rather than this is a fixed box you must tick.
Yeah, and I think like in a sort of example like this, like a little bit like this, but let's say that there was a product that the judges felt wasn't sweet enough in their mind to be a liqueur. That would definitely be something that the whoever's the head judge on the day, so in this case it would be me, would taste and then would make a judgment about, and then in conversation with Dave, we would say, well, and my thing to the judges would be, well, is it a good spirit though? And then we can work out the finer details of it later. But if you're thinking it's beautiful flavors and actually the sugar's really balanced and all this, it's a beautiful texture, then make sure that it does, that it, that it gets rewarded for all those positive things.
Exactly. And I think it's important to add as well that when we publish and release the results, the medals are very much, it's an IWSC gold medal, an IWSC silver medal. It's not a medal within that specific category. So the medals don't say IWSC silver medal in citrus liqueur, for instance. It's an IWSC silver medal. So when we do have those entries that may straddle a couple of categories, we're very much evaluating it as a spirit rather than getting the judges too caught up in the categories. So again, we very much use it to help us create the tasting orders. And during the judging day, the focus is really on the liquid on the glass. And if it's a quality liquid in the glass that the judges think it's a gold outstanding or a gold, then it will get a gold outstanding or a gold.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Dave, for answering this one. There was another question submitted in advance that was what has surprised David recently about the market. I assume it's Liqueurs and Bitters market. We can't hear you, David, for some reason. Hello? Are you on mute or something?
Good, sorry.
Yeah, you're back.
Good question. It was a tricky question because, like, I've been exploring so much with liqueurs recently, but not necessarily because of the market, but I've been doing various cocktail books where I've had to explore different things with liqueurs. So I don't have a much wider appreciation of liqueurs. And there, when a lot of these liqueurs first came out in the 1880s, and you had your things, particularly in the US, you had things like your Collinses and your Flips and that sort of that standard 6 or 7 cocktails. When all these fancy liqueurs came over, a lot of them came over from France. People wanted like a splash of them in whatever that drink was, and these liqueurs are very expensive. And although people wanted a little splash just to juice their drink up, they didn't want to pay anymore. So that's why they weren't very popular with the bartenders at that time. I was doing some experiments with some pisco sours. I was amazed at how just a little addition of a liqueur can really totally change the taste of some drinks. So I think like quite often, this is more about selling liqueurs really, but I think quite often liqueurs can be seen, oh, well, it's on the rocks, we put it in a coffee, you do this and you do that. And actually there is this like slightly untapped market where just this little addition can make a huge difference. So that was quite surprising to me. That's not really so much of a marketing thing, but that has been quite a surprise. I think one of the other things I've enjoyed certainly is the greater range of cream liqueurs that we've seen. You know, for a long time, you think like cream liqueurs didn't really exist before Bailey's, and now there's so much choice, and from so many different places around the world and different styles, and you know, you've got things like Amarula from South Africa and things like that. So I think that's quite exciting to me, and like sort of looking at some of them are texturally different as well, which for some people is a challenge, but I quite like it. Get a spoon and dig in, you know. Yeah, I think that's probably where that's generally my sorts of thoughts. Liqueurs are a funny one. When you really dig into one liqueur and you start really playing with it, you discover how exciting it actually genuinely is. So there you go. Hopefully that vaguely helps. But sorry, this is a bit of a funny one.
We've got a couple of questions submitted by Daniela. I think both of them sort of fall into the same answer probably. So if you want to address those, can you see them?
Yep, I can see this.
Yep.
So the first one is, how does the judging panel approach evaluating products with a unique flavor profile or unconventional ingredients? So I mean, it kind of depends on what it would be. So when it's been things like Mastica, which I mentioned before, I was familiar with what it tasted like and what the sort of typical taste of it was. So when we were before, I did a little briefing before the judges tasted it. I didn't have any comment on whether I thought that the product that they had was good or not. I gave an idea of how typical it was. I think that's probably the way. So I said, well, this is typical of that flavor, and then they could then go on and make a decision as to whether they thought it was any good or not. I think that's probably, I don't like, as a SJC as the lead judge, I shouldn't be influencing them. But obviously, sometimes people do need a little bit of information, so that's helpful. We had some Iraq last year, which I had some familiarity with, but we also had another judge who was very familiar with it, and so I had a bit of a discussion with him, and he came and joined us for that. So we do a little bit of that sort of thing. Usually, there's someone that's tasted it before. Quite often, it's me, or we can look up what it generally should be tasting like. In answer to your particular question, let's just have a look here. So there's a question of an aperitivo with a berries profile, whether that has been something like that has entered previously. I can think of products, but I can't think of anything that we've tried. We have had aperitivos and things like that, but I can't think of anything that springs to mind that has red berries with the aperitivo. I mean, I would, I imagine if we were judging something like this and it came through as aperitivo with red berries might be the note, Dave. I imagine it'd be something along those lines. And then there would be a few aperitivos, and before we started the judging, I would then go and describe that this is what this is. Some people might drink it on its own, but you've got to think like, actually, this is quite often, maybe it's going to be lengthened with sparkling wine or with soda water or things like that. So bear that in mind as well when you're judging it. That would be the sort of thing I'd say. Sorry, Dave.
No, I think that will make sense. And I think, yeah, with those things that are a little bit unusual or unique, for instance, we quite often, if the judges are tasting it or if David's tasting it, and there is that question like, oh, this is exciting, but not a traditional aperitivo style, it's a little bit unusual, then we obviously maintain the blind tasting element, but if there is something, then I'll discuss with David, and maybe give some steering as to what the reason might be for that, and I think it's really important and exciting as well that for these new unique innovations, and we do have a few each year where submitters are asking, how would you classify this, because there's not anything else like it in the world. And generally, I think the judges are really excited to try this sort of stuff. Like they often bring up questions if they're doing something slightly different. But yeah, I think it's a good thing. And yeah, the judges are always very excited to try and evaluate new things. And I think that's part of the beauty of what we do.
I think like with something like that, let's say that it, for whatever reason, it hadn't said red berries on it. Typically, I mean, I probably would have been trying these, might have been trying these anyway. But if we were sort of alerted to it, and I taste it, I'd say to Dave, well, is there any getting some like berry notes? Is there anything on the bottle that suggests that we might be expecting that? And then he'd be able to go and check and say, yeah, and then we're like, right, fine, it's an aperitivo. It's got the berry notes. This is what we're expecting. Lovely, and then score it accordingly. So that would be to give you a sort of rough idea of roughly how it would exactly work. That's about it.